in the gentle hills of Byzantine Anatolia, where ancient olive groves stretch across sun-warmed slopes and stone buildings hold the memory of countless harvests. A man named Constantine tends the pressing rooms of a prosperous agricultural estate. The year is 1328, and autumn has arrived with its promise of harvest and oil. Welcome to this quiet hour of the night. I am honored to share this time with you. As darkness settles around us, we will journey together to a Byzantine estate in western Anatolia, following Constantine through the time-worn rhythms of olive oil production. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort, knowing that this story asks nothing of you but to simply listen and rest. Constantine was 41 years old, his forearms marked with old pressing stains, his movements carrying the unhurried certainty of a man who had spent decades perfecting his craft. The estate's pressing building stood at the edge of the olive groves, its thick stone walls keeping the interior cool even during the warmest hours. This morning, the scent of crushed olives already drifted through the open doorway, mingling with the earthy smell of turned soil and the distant sweetness of ripening fruit. He stepped into the pressing room, where morning light filtered through high windows, casting amber patterns across the worn stone floor. The massive wooden beam press stood in the chamber's center, its ancient timbers smooth from generations of use. Constantine ran his calloused hand along the beam's surface, feeling the grain beneath his palm, the wood still cool from the night air. By mid-morning, workers had delivered the first baskets of olives to the building's entrance. The fruit gleamed dark purple and green, freshly gathered from trees his grandfather had known as saplings. Constantine lifted one olive between his fingers, testing its firmness with practiced attention. The weight felt right, the skin intact, the harvest timing perfect for the rich oil these groves produced year after faithful year. The sorting tables waited nearby, their surfaces scrubbed clean the previous evening. Constantine began transferring olives from the large baskets to the tables, his work-stained forearms moving in steady rhythm. Each olive received brief scrutiny as he removed any leaves or small twigs that clung to the fruit. The repetitive task brought him into the present moment, his mind settling into the familiar pattern of selection and placement. Around him, the pressing room held the accumulated peace of centuries. Stone walls 2 feet thick muffled outside sounds, creating an atmosphere of mellow quietness. The temperature remained constant, neither warm nor cool, maintained by the building's careful construction and the earth-packed floor beneath his feet. Constantine appreciated this stability, the way the room seemed to exist outside the rushing passage of time. When the sorting was complete, he carried the olives to the grinding area. The millstone waited there, its circular surface marked by countless previous harvests. 2 workers arrived to help with the grinding, their presence adding gentle companionship without breaking the room's tranquil rhythm. Together, they poured olives into the stone basin, and Constantine signaled for the mule to be brought forward. The animal stepped into its accustomed place with familiar patience. Its hooves made soft sounds against the floor as it began its circular path, turning the heavy millstone that would crush the olives into paste. Constantine watched the process begin, noting the gradual transformation as the whole fruit became pulp beneath the stone's steady rotation. The scent intensified, released oils filling the air with their distinctive aroma, grassy, slightly bitter, unmistakably olive. Hours passed in this measured way. The mule continued its endless circle, the millstone turned, and olive paste accumulated in the basin. Constantine checked the consistency periodically, his ink-stained fingers testing the texture, ensuring the grinding proceeded neither too quickly nor too slowly. His deep contentment, the baseline mood that defined most of his days, settled over him like a well-worn cloak. The afternoon light had shifted by the time the grinding was complete. Constantine dismissed the mule with an affectionate pat, then examined the thick paste that would yield the estate's precious oil. He scooped portions of the paste into woven fiber mats, ancient tools that allowed liquid to drain while holding back solid material. Each mat received careful filling, the paste distributed evenly across its surface before being folded and stacked. The stacked mats went beneath the press beam, their layers creating a tower of potential. Constantine positioned heavy stones atop the beam, their weight beginning the slow work of extraction. Clear golden-green oil started seeping from the mats almost immediately, trickling down into the collection basin carved into the floor. He observed this initial flow with quiet satisfaction, recognizing the quality in the oil's color and clarity. This first pressing would yield the finest oil, reserved for the estate owner's table and for sale at premium prices in distant markets. Constantine had produced such oil for 23 years, and still the sight of that first golden stream brought him simple pleasure. The work connected him to something larger than himself, to the land, to tradition, to the patient collaboration between human effort and nature's abundance. As evening approached, the pressing room grew dimmer. Constantine lit oil lamps along the walls, their flames adding warmth to the space. The pressed oil continued its gradual accumulation, drop by patient drop falling into the basin below. He settled onto a worn wooden bench against the wall, content to keep watch over the process while his body rested from the day's labor. The lamplight played across the stone surfaces, creating shifting patterns that held his mild attention. He thought about the olive trees on the hillsides, their twisted trunks and silver-green leaves, the way they seemed to draw sustenance from stone itself. Some of those trees had stood for 300 years or more, producing fruit through generations of careful tending. His own work formed one small link in that continuing chain. Later, when the initial pressing had finished, Constantine removed the mats and examined the remaining paste. A second pressing would extract more oil, of slightly lesser quality but still valuable for cooking and lamps. He repositioned the mats and added additional stones to the beam, increasing the pressure. The process began again, requiring nothing from him now except occasional observation. The night deepened around the pressing building. Through the high windows, Constantine could see stars emerging in the clear sky. The rhythm of his work had brought him to this peaceful hour, and he felt grateful for the day's productivity. Tomorrow would bring similar tasks, more olives to sort, more paste to press, more oil to collect and store in the great ceramic vessels that lined the storage room. He walked to those vessels now, running his hand along their cool surfaces. Each stood nearly as tall as a man, their interiors glazed and sealed to preserve the oil within. By winter's end, These containers would hold the harvest of acres of groves, liquid gold that sustained the estate and fed trade networks stretching to Constantinople and beyond. The thought of that connection pleased him, though he felt no need to trace it further. Back in the pressing room, Constantine extinguished all but one lamp. The remaining flame cast gentle light across the beam press and the slowly filling basin. He checked the oil level once more, noting its steady increase, then prepared to return to his modest dwelling near the estate's main buildings. The night watchman would arrive soon to tend the lamps and monitor the pressing through the dark hours. Constantine stepped outside into cool autumn air. The scent of earth and olive leaves surrounded him, carried on a mild breeze that rustled through the groves. Above, the stars continued their ancient patterns, the same constellations his ancestors had observed from these hills. He walked the familiar path toward home, his work-stained forearms relaxed at his sides, his mind quiet with the satisfaction of tasks well done. The next morning arrived with mist clinging to the valley floors, softening the landscape into shades of pearl and silver. Constantine woke before dawn, as was his custom, and dressed in his work tunic while the household still slept. The air held autumn's increasing coolness, pleasant against his skin as he made his way back to the pressing building through the half-light. Inside, the night watchman had maintained the lamps and monitored the second pressing. Constantine thanked him with a nod, and the man departed for his own rest. The pressing room felt particularly serene at this hour, with only the faint drip of oil into the collection basin breaking the silence. Constantine stood for a moment, simply breathing in the familiar scent, allowing the peace of the space to settle into his bones. He ladled oil from the basin into a smaller ceramic vessel, carrying it to the settling room adjacent to the main pressing area. Here, the oil would rest undisturbed for several days, allowing any remaining water and sediment to separate and sink to the bottom. Stone shelves lined the walls, holding vessels at various stages of this patient process. Constantine placed his new container among them, then checked the others, noting which had settled sufficiently for the next step. One vessel caught his attention, oil pressed 4 days earlier that now showed perfect clarity in its upper portions. He carefully decanted this clear oil into storage jars, working with deliberate precision to avoid disturbing the sediment layer. The golden-green liquid flowed in a steady stream, catching the lamplight as it filled each jar. Constantine sealed these containers with cork stoppers, then marked them with simple notations indicating the pressing date and grove location. The morning had fully arrived by the time he finished this task. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, warming the stone floor beneath his feet. Constantine heard voices outside, workers arriving with more baskets of olives, the harvest continuing its steady progression. He stepped to the doorway and surveyed the scene, his observant nature taking in details others might miss. The olive gatherers moved through the groves with practiced efficiency, using long poles to gently encourage ripe fruit from the branches. Baskets accumulated beneath the trees, slowly filling with the day's yield. Constantine watched a young worker, perhaps 18 years old, learning the proper technique from an older harvester. The patience in the older man's instruction reminded Constantine of his own apprenticeship decades earlier, when his father had taught him these same methods. He returned inside to prepare for the day's pressing. The millstone required cleaning from the previous day's work, its surface needing to be scraped free of dried paste. Constantine took up the wooden scraper and began this maintenance, his movements falling into the rhythm that characterized all his tasks. The scraping sound echoed softly in the chamber, a mellow percussion that marked the passage of time. Fresh olives arrived as he worked. The estate's overseer, a capable man named Demetrios, supervised their delivery and exchanged brief words with Constantine about the harvest's progress. The groves were yielding well this season, Demetrios reported, the summer's balanced rainfall having produced fruit of excellent size and oil content. Constantine acknowledged this information with understated satisfaction, already seeing evidence of quality in the olives before him. When the millstone was clean, Constantine began the sorting process anew. His work-stained fingers moved through the fresh fruit, removing debris and selecting only the finest olives for pressing. This particular batch came from the estate's oldest grove, trees planted when the region was still under different rule, before the current dynasty's time. The olives from these ancient trees produced oil of exceptional character, complex and smooth. The grinding began again, the mule resuming its circular path with the same patient dedication it brought each day. Constantine added olives to the basin in careful amounts, maintaining the proper ratio of fruit to grinding time. The paste formed gradually, its texture reaching the ideal consistency that experience had taught him to recognize without measurement or formal instruction. His hands knew the work, his body carrying knowledge accumulated through years of repetition. By midday, the pressing room had grown warmer. Constantine opened additional windows to encourage air circulation, and a gentle cross breeze began flowing through the space. The scent of olive oil mingled with fresher air, creating an atmosphere both energizing and calming. He paused to drink water from a ceramic cup, standing in the doorway where he could observe both the interior workspace and the exterior landscape. The hills rolled away toward distant mountains, their slopes covered in the silver green of olive groves interspersed with darker cypress trees. Stone walls divided fields and marked property boundaries, their ancient construction still serving the same practical purposes for which they'd been built generations ago. Constantine found comfort in this continuity, the way human effort and natural landscape had merged into something that felt permanent, even knowing nothing truly lasted forever. His contemplation ended naturally, and he returned to the press. The mats needed preparation for the day's pressing, so he carried them outside to check their condition in full daylight. Several required cleaning, others needed minor repairs to their woven fibers. Constantine sat on a low stone wall and worked through these tasks with thorough attention, his needle and strong thread mending small tears, his brush removing dried paste from the fibers. An estate cat approached while he worked, a lean gray creature that haunted the pressing building and surrounding areas. Constantine greeted it with gentle words, and the animal settled nearby to groom itself in a patch of sunlight. Its presence added another layer of peaceful companionship to the afternoon. The cat had appeared several years earlier, and proven itself valuable in keeping mice away from stored grain and oil supplies. When the mats were ready, Constantine carried them back inside and loaded them with the freshly ground paste. The stacking required care, each mat needing to sit level upon the one below to ensure even pressure distribution. He worked slowly, checking alignment as he built the tower of mats beneath the press beam. This attention to small details made the difference between good oil and excellent oil, between adequate yield and optimal extraction. The heavy stones went into place atop the beam, and pressure began building on the stacked mats. Almost immediately, oil started flowing, its color particularly vibrant from this batch of ancient grove olives. Constantine positioned collection vessels to catch every drop, unwilling to waste even the smallest amount of this precious liquid. The flow settled into a steady trickle, a sound that would continue for hours as gravity and pressure did their patient work. He used this waiting time for other necessary tasks. The storage room required attention. Empty vessels needed cleaning. Full ones needed checking for any signs of spoilage or improper sealing. Constantine moved among the great ceramic jars with easy familiarity, his body navigating the space without conscious thought. Each vessel received inspection, each seal got tested, each container's contents got evaluated through sight and smell. One jar showed signs of slight seepage around its stopper. Constantine removed the cork and examined it, finding a small crack in the material. He replaced it with a fresh stopper from his supplies, then checked the oil itself. The quality remained perfect, the seepage having been minimal and recent. He made a mental note to monitor this particular vessel more closely over coming days, ensuring the new seal held properly. The afternoon aged toward evening. Constantine returned to the pressing room and found the flow from the mats had slowed to occasional drops. He examined the oil collected in the basin, noting its clarity and depth of color. This pressing had yielded exceptionally well, confirming Demetrios's assessment of the harvest quality. Constantine allowed himself a slight smile, a small expression of the deep contentment that formed his emotional center. He ladled the new oil into settling vessels and carried them to the adjacent room, adding them to the rows of containers already resting there. The settling room held a particular quietness, its purpose requiring stillness and time rather than active labor. Constantine appreciated this space for its embodiment of patience, the way it reminded him that some processes could not be rushed, that quality emerged from allowing natural separation to occur at its own pace. Back in the pressing room, he began the second pressing of the day's paste. Additional stones loaded onto the beam increased the pressure, and a fresh flow of oil began, lighter in color than the first pressing but still valuable. This oil would serve the estate's daily cooking needs and fill the lamps that illuminated evening activities throughout the buildings and courtyards. Constantine settled onto his bench to rest while the second pressing proceeded. His body felt the pleasant fatigue of productive labor, muscles having worked steadily since before dawn. He leaned back against the cool stone wall and allowed his eyes to close briefly, not sleeping but simply resting in the pressing room's peaceful atmosphere. The sound of oil dripping into the basin created a gentle rhythm, almost musical in its regularity. When he opened his eyes again, the light had shifted further toward evening. Through the windows, he could see the sky taking on the warmer tones of approaching sunset. Constantine rose from the bench and checked the pressing's progress, finding it nearly complete. He would need to work into the evening to finish processing this batch, but the thought brought no resistance. The work unfolded at its own pace, and he moved with it willingly. The evening meal would wait in his dwelling, prepared by his wife Anna before she retired to her own tasks. Constantine thought of her briefly with affectionate gratitude. 41 years old, her capable hands managing their household with the same steady competence he brought to oil production. Their life together had settled into comfortable patterns over 20 years of marriage, each supporting the other's work without need for elaborate discussion or planning. He pushed these thoughts aside gently and focused on the tasks at hand. The second pressing required monitoring. The collection basin needed emptying into settling vessels, and the pressing room required tidying before he could properly conclude the day's work. Constantine moved through these responsibilities with his characteristic unhurried thoroughness, giving each task its due attention. The last of the oil trickled into the basin as true dusk arrived. Constantine lit the evening lamps, their flames pushing back the gathering darkness. He transferred the final oil to its settling vessel, then began cleaning the press and surrounding area. The mats got hung to dry, the millstone got wiped clean, and the floor got swept of olive fragments and spilled paste. When everything stood ready for the next day's work, Constantine extinguished all but one lamp and stepped outside. The night had brought coolness and clarity, stars already bright in the darkening sky. He could smell wood smoke from the estate's various hearths, mixed with the ever-present scent of olives that seemed woven into the very air of this place. Constantine paused on the threshold, looking back at the pressing room with quiet satisfaction before turning toward home and rest. The following days took on the rhythm Constantine knew best, each morning arriving with its baskets of olives, each afternoon bringing the steady work of pressing, each evening closing with oil safely stored in settling vessels. The harvest continued its patient progression through the groves, moving from one section to another as fruit reached optimal ripeness. Constantine adapted his work to the varying characteristics of each grove's yield, his experience allowing him to adjust grinding times and pressing pressures without conscious calculation. On the fourth morning after the ancient grove pressing, Constantine arrived to find Demetrios waiting at the pressing building with a visitor. The man was perhaps 50 years old, his clothing indicating modest prosperity, his manner carrying the careful courtesy of someone engaged in trade negotiations. Demetrios introduced him as Alexios, a merchant from the coastal city who purchased oil for export to markets across the sea. Constantine welcomed the merchant with simple politeness, then led both men into the settling room where the estate's finest oil rested in its vessels. The morning light fell across the ceramic containers, illuminating the golden-green liquid visible through their openings. Alexios approached the nearest vessel and inhaled deeply, his experienced nose assessing the oil's quality through scent alone. The merchant asked to taste a sample, and Constantine ladled a small amount into a wooden cup. Alexios swirled the oil, observing its clarity and color, then tasted it with the focused attention of someone whose livelihood depended on accurate evaluation. His expression shifted into appreciation, and he exchanged meaningful glances with Demetrios. The quality exceeded his expectations, he said quietly, and he wished to purchase the entire yield of the ancient groves if terms could be arranged. Constantine listened to the subsequent discussion without active participation. These negotiations fell to Demetrios as a state overseer, and Constantine's role involved only confirming quantities and pressing schedules. When asked about production capacity, he provided straightforward answers. The ancient groves would yield approximately 30 more days of harvest, weather permitting, and he could process roughly 6 baskets per day while maintaining the quality standards that produced oil of this character. The merchant departed satisfied, having reached preliminary agreement with Demetrios on prices and delivery schedules. After Alexios left, Demetrios lingered briefly to thank Constantine for the exceptional quality of his work. The overseer's words held genuine appreciation, and Constantine accepted them with his characteristic understated grace. The quality emerged from attention and patience. He replied simply, the same methods his father had taught him decades earlier. When Demetrios also departed, Constantine returned to his familiar routines. Fresh olives waited for sorting, and he settled into this task with the same thoroughness he brought each day. His work-stained fingers moved through the fruit, his observant nature noting variations in size and ripeness that informed his decisions about grinding and pressing. Each olive received its moment of evaluation before joining the approved pile destined for the millstone. The morning progressed through its accustomed stages. Grinding commenced with the mule's patient circles, paste accumulated in the stone basin, and Constantine monitored the process with practiced attention. He found himself humming quietly while he worked, wordless melodies that emerged without conscious intention. The sound barely rose above the ambient noise of the pressing room, more vibration than music, but it settled his mind into deeper focus on the tasks at hand. By afternoon, a subtle shift in the weather became apparent. Clouds had gathered over the distant mountains, their forms suggesting possible rain by evening. Constantine observed this development with mild interest but no concern. The pressing building's thick walls and solid roof provided complete shelter, and rain at this stage of harvest would benefit the olives still ripening on the trees. The earth could always use moisture, and autumn storms rarely brought the intensity that might damage fruit or disrupt work schedules. He continued pressing the morning's paste, the beam loaded with stones, the mat stacked and compressed beneath its weight. Oil flowed steadily into the collection basin, its rate of accumulation confirming Constantine's assessment of the fruit's quality. This batch came from groves planted approximately 80 years earlier, their trees mature but not yet approaching the ancient status of the oldest sections. The oil showed excellent characteristics: clean flavor, good color, balanced intensity. While the pressing proceeded, Constantine took time to review his supplies. The woven mats would need replacement soon, several showing where that would compromise their effectiveness within the next few weeks. He made mental notes about quantities needed and materials required, planning to speak with the estate's weaver about commissioning new mats before the current ones failed completely. This forward planning prevented disruptions, ensuring continuous operation throughout the harvest season. The cat appeared in the doorway, pausing to assess the room before entering. Constantine acknowledged its presence with a soft sound, and the animal crossed to its preferred resting spot near the warmth radiating from the stone walls. It settled into a compact curl, tail wrapped around its body, and closed its eyes. The creature's contentment added another layer of peace to the pressing room's atmosphere. Late afternoon brought the first raindrops, gentle pattering against the roof that gradually intensified into steady precipitation. Constantine moved to close the high windows partially, preventing rain from entering while still allowing air circulation. The sound of rain created a soothing backdrop to his work, a natural rhythm that complemented the dripping of oil into the basin and the occasional shift of settling stones on the press beam. He used the rainy afternoon to attend to maintenance tasks that often got postponed during busy pressing days. The wooden beam required inspection for cracks or stress points, its structural integrity essential to the press's safe operation. Constantine examined every visible surface, running his hands along the ancient timber, feeling for irregularities that might indicate developing problems. He found nothing concerning. The beam remained sound, its strength undiminished despite decades of heavy use. The collection basin also needed thorough cleaning, a task best accomplished when no active pressing demanded its immediate use. Constantine bilaid out the remaining oil into temporary vessels, then scrubbed the basin's stone surface with coarse cloth and clean water. Residue from countless pressings had built up in microscopic layers, and removing this accumulation prevented any potential contamination of future batches. The work required sustained effort, his arms moving in circular patterns, his attention focused on achieving uniform cleanliness across every inch of carved stone. When the basin gleamed to his satisfaction, Constantine allowed it to air dry while he turned attention to his tools. Scrapers needed sharpening, ladles required checking for cracks, and various implements demanded the routine care that extended their useful life. He worked methodically through these tasks, his movements efficient but never hurried, each tool receiving appropriate attention before being returned to its designated storage location. The rain continued through the evening hours. Constantine lit the lamps earlier than usual, the overcast conditions having brought premature dimness to the pressing room. The lamplight reflected off wet surfaces visible through the partially open windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted with the flame's gentle movement. He found the interplay visually pleasing, a small beauty that required no analysis or interpretation to appreciate. His thoughts drifted to the merchant Alexios and the export trade that carried Byzantine oil to distant markets. Constantine had never traveled to the coastal cities where ships loaded cargo for foreign ports, but he understood his work's connection to those distant transactions. Oil pressed in this hillside building would eventually reach tables and lamps in places he could barely imagine, serving purposes and people entirely unknown to him. The thought created a sense of participation in something larger than his immediate experience, a quiet satisfaction that needed no elaboration. The evening meal hour approached, and Constantine prepared to conclude his workday. He checked the settling vessels one final time, verified that all lamps were properly secured, and ensured the pressing room stood ready for the next morning's activities. The rain had settled into a gentle, steady rhythm that would likely continue through the night, soaking into the earth and replenishing wells and cisterns throughout the estate. Constantine stepped outside into the rain, pulling his cloak's hood over his head. The cool water touched his face where the hood left it exposed, refreshing after hours in the pressing room's close atmosphere. He walked the familiar path toward his dwelling, his feet finding the way despite limited visibility in the darkness and rain. Lamplight glowed from windows scattered across the estate's residential area, warm points of light in the wet evening. Anna had prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and olives, appropriate food for an olive presser, Constantine thought with gentle amusement. They ate together in comfortable silence, the rain audible against their dwelling's tiled roof. After the meal, Constantine sat near their small hearth, allowing the fire's warmth to relax muscles that had worked steadily throughout the day. Anna worked at her loom in the corner, the shuttle's passage creating soft, rhythmic sounds that blended with the rain and crackling fire. Constantine felt the deep contentment that characterized his emotional baseline settling over him completely. The day had brought productive work, the harvest continued well, and the merchant's interest confirmed the quality of his efforts. Beyond these specific satisfactions lay something less definable, a sense of rightness about his place in the world, about the work that filled his days, about the rhythms that carried him from season to season and year to year. He remained by the hearth until drowsiness began overtaking alertness, then rose and prepared for sleep. The rain continued its gentle drumming overhead as Constantine settled onto his sleeping pallet, Anna already resting nearby. His last conscious thoughts touched briefly on the next day's work, more olives to process, more oil to extract, the endless patient cycle that defined autumn on a Byzantine agricultural estate. Then sleep arrived, carrying him into darkness as complete and peaceful as the night surrounding their dwelling. Morning came with clearing skies and fresh-washed air. Constantine woke naturally as dawn light began penetrating the darkness, his body's internal rhythm more reliable than any timepiece. He dressed quietly to avoid disturbing Anna, then stepped outside into a transformed landscape. Rain had intensified all colors, making the olive groves appear more vividly green, the earth a deeper brown, the sky a clearer blue where clouds had parted. The walk to the pressing building took him past puddles reflecting morning light and trees still releasing occasional drops from their leaves. The air smelled of wet earth and stone, clean and fresh after the previous day's steady rain. Constantine breathed deeply, appreciating the crispness, feeling renewal in the atmosphere that matched his own readiness to begin another day's work. Inside the pressing room, everything stood exactly as he had left it. The lamps had burned down to nothing, their oil consumed during the night, but morning light now provided adequate illumination. Constantine opened the windows fully, allowing fresh air to circulate through the space, replacing the previous day's accumulated warmth and moisture with cool clarity. He stood for a moment in the room's center, simply present with his surroundings before activity commenced. The press beam rose above him, the collection basin waited empty and clean, and the millstone rested silent in its circular track. All these familiar elements composed a workspace that felt as much a part of him as his own body, tools and space merged through years of intimate association. The sound of approaching voices announced the arrival of workers with fresh olive baskets. Constantine moved to the doorway to receive them, ready to begin another day's transformation of fruit into liquid gold. another rotation through the timeless cycle that connected him to land, tradition, and the patient rhythms of agricultural life. The baskets arrived filled with olives from the middle groves, trees planted during Constantine's childhood that had reached their prime productive years. He supervised their placement in the sorting area, noting the fruit's excellent condition after the previous night's rain. The washing that nature had provided left the olives gleaming, their skins taut and unblemished, requiring less cleaning than usual before processing could begin. Constantine settled into the sorting with particular ease this morning. His work-stained fingers moved through the fruit with familiar efficiency, though he maintained his customary thoroughness despite the reduced need for debris removal. The repetitive motion brought his mind into a state of calm focus, thoughts quieting into simple awareness of touch and texture, color and weight. Each olive passed through his evaluation and joined the growing pile destined for the millstone. The mule arrived with its handler, a young man named Georgios who had tended the estate's animals since boyhood. Constantine exchanged brief greetings with him, their conversation limited to practical matters, the mule's condition, the day's expected workload, the proper pace for grinding this particular batch. Georgios had learned to read Constantine's preferences over several seasons of collaboration, and the two men worked together with minimal need for explicit instruction. Once the mule began its circular path, Constantine turned his attention to other preparations. The pressing mats from the previous day required inspection after their drying period. He examined each one carefully, testing fibers for weakness, checking the weaving's integrity, noting which mats could continue in service, and which had reached the point where further use risked compromising oil quality. 3 mats showed sufficient wear to warrant replacement, and he set these aside for the weaver's attention. The grinding proceeded through the morning hours with its customary steadiness. Constantine monitored the paste's development, occasionally testing its consistency with his fingers. The texture evolved gradually from chunky fragments to smooth pulp, the transition happening so incrementally that only experienced observation could detect the optimal moment to cease grinding. Constantine made this determination without conscious analysis, his body's accumulated knowledge recognizing the proper state before his mind could articulate the reasoning. When grinding concluded, Georgios led the mule away for rest and water. Constantine began loading the paste into pressing mats, working alone now in the quiet pressing room. The solitude felt comfortable rather than isolating, a familiar state that allowed complete focus on the task. He spread paste evenly across each mat's surface, folded them with practiced precision, and stacked them beneath the press beam with careful attention to alignment. The positioning of stones atop the beam followed its own particular logic. Constantine had learned through years of experience how different stone arrangements affected pressure distribution and extraction efficiency. He selected and placed each stone deliberately, building the load in a sequence that would maximize yield while maintaining the gentle pressure that preserved oil quality. Too much force too quickly could introduce bitterness. Too little pressure wasted potential. The balance required judgment that no written instruction could adequately convey. Oil began flowing almost immediately once the full weight settled onto the stacked mats. Constantine positioned collection vessels with care, then stepped back to observe the initial flow. The color appeared particularly vibrant this morning, the golden-green hue indicating high quality. He felt quiet satisfaction at this confirmation of the fruit's excellence and his processing decisions. With the pressing underway, Constantine turned to the settling room to check vessels from previous days. One batch had completed its separation period and now showed perfect clarity in its upper portions. He began the careful decanting process, transferring clear oil into storage jars while leaving sediment undisturbed at each vessel's bottom. The work demanded steady hands and patient attention, qualities that Constantine possessed in abundance. The morning had progressed toward midday by the time he finished decanting. Constantine carried the filled storage jars to the main storage room, adding them to the growing inventory of processed oil. The room's temperature remained consistently cool, its thick walls and limited windows creating ideal conditions for preservation. Constantine walked among the great ceramic vessels, conducting his routine inspection of seals and containers, his observant nature noting any changes or concerns requiring attention. Everything appeared in proper order. The estate's oil supply grew steadily as harvest continued, each day adding to the accumulated wealth represented by these vessels. Constantine understood his role in creating this abundance, yet he felt no particular pride or possessiveness about the achievement. The work simply was what it was: necessary, valuable, and deeply familiar. His satisfaction came from doing it well rather than from any external recognition or reward. He returned to the pressing room to find the oil flow continuing steadily. The rhythmic dripping into the collection basin created a peaceful backdrop to the afternoon's unfolding. Constantine settled onto his bench, allowing himself a brief rest after the morning's sustained activity. His body appreciated these pauses, moments when muscles could relax and breathing could deepen into the slower rhythm that came naturally when demands eased. Through the high windows, he could see clouds building again over the mountains. Another storm seemed likely by evening, though the current conditions remained pleasant. Mild temperature, gentle breeze, adequate light filtering through periodic cloud cover. Constantine found himself hopping for rain during the night hours, leaving days clear for harvest work while providing moisture the land still needed after summer's long dry months. The gray cat appeared in the doorway, pausing as always to survey the space before entering. Constantine noticed it carried something in its mouth, a small field mouse, freshly caught. The animal proceeded to its usual resting spot and settled down to consume its prize, entirely unconcerned by Constantine's presence. He watched this display of natural behavior with mild interest, appreciating the cat's hunting skill and its comfortable assumption that the pressing room offered safe space for such activities. When the first pressing's flow had slowed to occasional drops, Constantine rose from his bench and began preparations for the second pressing. He removed the compressed mats carefully, noting how thoroughly the initial extraction had depleted the paste. The remaining material still held some oil, however, and the second pressing would recover this additional yield. Constantine restacked the mats with fresh stones, adding increased pressure, and soon a renewed flow began, lighter in color but still valuable. The afternoon aged toward evening while the second pressing proceeded. Constantine used this time to complete various maintenance tasks, sharpening scrapers that had dulled through use, replacing a worn rope used for securing certain press components, organizing his tool storage area to improve efficiency. These small improvements accumulated over time into significant enhancements of the workspace's functionality, each adjustment making subsequent work slightly easier or more effective. Demetrios appeared as Constantine worked on these tasks, stopping by to check the day's progress and discuss upcoming needs. The overseer mentioned that the estate owner would visit within the next few days, coming from his primary residence in the capital to inspect the harvest's progress. This information held practical implications. Constantine would need to ensure the pressing room appeared particularly well organized, and that the finest oil samples were readily available for examination. After Demetrios departed, Constantine considered the upcoming visit with his characteristic calm. The estate owner was a reasonable man who appreciated quality work and rarely interfered with established procedures. Constantine had met him perhaps a dozen times over the years, each encounter brief and cordial, the owner expressing satisfaction with oil production and Constantine responding with modest acknowledgement. These visits created slight disruption to routine, but nothing that caused genuine concern or anxiety. The evening brought the anticipated return of rain, though less intense than the previous night's steady downpour. Constantine completed the day's pressing, transferred oil to settling vessels, and performed his usual closing procedures. The pressing room stood ready for the next morning's work, everything in its proper place, all tools cleaned and stored appropriately. He stepped outside into the soft rain, his cloak providing adequate protection for the walk home. The dampness felt refreshing against his face, and he paused briefly to simply stand in the rainfall, allowing it to wash away the day's accumulated dust and residue. The simple pleasure of cool water on warm skin, the scent of wet earth and olive leaves, the gentle sound of rain on stone, these sensory experiences grounded him completely in the present moment. Anna had prepared their evening meal and sat waiting by the hearth when Constantine arrived. They shared food and quiet conversation, Anna relating small events from her day in the household, while Constantine listened with genuine attention. Her words created a gentle counterpoint to his own internal processing of the day's work, their separate experiences weaving together into the shared fabric of married life. After the meal, Constantine sat by the hearth while Anna returned to her loom. The rain continued its soft percussion overhead, creating a soothing backdrop to the evening's quiet activities. Constantine found his thoughts drifting without particular direction or purpose, simply floating among memories and observations, plans and reflections. The state felt restful, his mind moving through these various considerations without grasping or analyzing any single thread for extended focus. He thought briefly about the upcoming visit from the estate owner, mentally reviewing the pressing room's current state and considering any final preparations that might enhance the presentation. Nothing significant required attention. The space maintained its usual orderliness, and the oil quality spoke for itself. Still, Constantine made mental notes about small touches that might demonstrate extra care and attention to detail. His thoughts moved on to the harvest's broader progress. By his estimation, Approximately half the estate's olive groves had been processed, with the remainder scheduled for the coming weeks as fruit reached optimal ripeness. The timing appeared favorable. Weather conditions had been generally cooperative, fruit quality exceeded average years, and the pressing equipment continued functioning without significant problems. Barring unexpected difficulties, this harvest would rank among the most successful of Constantine's career. The word career floated through his mind with slight amusement. He had never thought of his work in such formal terms, yet 23 years of oil pressing certainly constituted something beyond merely having a job. The craft had shaped his adult life, filled his days with purposeful activity, connected him to land and tradition in ways that created deep satisfaction. Perhaps career was indeed the appropriate term, though Constantine felt no need to dwell on such linguistic considerations. Drowsiness began overtaking alertness as the evening deepened. Constantine remained by the hearth a while longer, simply enjoying the warmth and watching firelight play across the room's stone walls. Anna's loom fell silent as she completed her own work for the day. They prepared for sleep with the comfortable efficiency of a long-established routine, each moving through familiar actions while the rain continued its gentle sound above. Constantine settled onto his pallet with the deep contentment that formed his emotional baseline. The day had brought solid work and satisfactory results. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, and the rhythm of harvest continued its patient unfolding. These simple facts created a foundation of peace beneath all other thoughts and feelings. He closed his eyes and allowed sleep to arrive naturally, carrying him into darkness while rain whispered against the roof tiles overhead. Morning arrived with clearing skies and the particular clarity that followed rain. Constantine woke to find sunlight already streaming through the small window of their dwelling, indicating he had slept slightly later than usual. The extra rest felt welcome, his body having worked steadily through many consecutive days of harvest processing. He dressed unhurriedly and stepped outside to find the world transformed by the night's moisture. Everything gleamed in the fresh light: wet stones, glistening leaves, puddles reflecting sky and clouds. The air held a coolness that would dissipate as the sun climbed higher, but for now it provided refreshing contrast to the pressing room's accumulated warmth. Constantine walked toward his workspace, observing how the rain had settled dust throughout the estate and left the landscape looking scrubbed and renewed. Inside the pressing room, he began his morning preparations with familiar movements. Windows opened to admit fresh air, tools arranged in their customary positions, the millstone checked for any debris that might have accumulated overnight. These opening rituals created a transition from rest to work, his mind and body gradually engaging with the day's tasks ahead. Constantine found comfort in this gradual awakening rather than abrupt commencement of activity. The first baskets of olives arrived from groves on the eastern slopes, fruit that received morning sun earlier than other sections of the estate. These trees often produced olives with subtly different characteristics, something in the light exposure or soil composition, creating variations that Constantine had learned to recognize. He began sorting with particular attention to these nuances, his observant nature cataloging details that informed processing decisions. Georgios brought the mule at the appointed time, and grinding commenced with its customary steady rhythm. Constantine stood nearby, monitoring the paste's development while also watching morning light shift across the pressing room's interior. Sunbeams moved gradually along the floor as the sun climbed higher, creating patterns that marked time's passage more reliably than any mechanical device. He found these natural indicators satisfying in their simplicity and accuracy. The morning progressed through its established sequence, grinding completed, paste loaded into mats, stones positioned for pressing, oil beginning its patient flow into collection vessels. Constantine performed each step with thorough attention while maintaining an underlying ease in his movements. The work required care but not tension, focus but not strain. This balance had taken years to develop, and he maintained it now without conscious effort. While the pressing proceeded, Constantine heard voices approaching from outside. He recognized Demetrios speaking with someone else, the overseer's tone carrying the particular formality he employed when addressing the estate owner. Constantine straightened slightly and wiped his work-stained hands on a cloth, preparing to receive visitors, though he felt no anxiety about the encounter. The estate owner entered first, a man of perhaps 45 years, his clothing reflecting wealth without ostentation. His name was Theodoros, and he carried himself with quiet authority tempered by genuine interest in the operations under his ownership. Demetrios followed, and together they approached Constantine with courteous greetings that he returned with respectful simplicity. Theodoros asked about the harvest's progress, and Constantine provided straightforward information. The yield had been excellent thus far, fruit quality exceeded recent years, and processing continued without significant difficulties. He gestured toward the pressing operation currently underway, and Theodoros moved closer to observe the oil flowing into collection vessels. The estate owner's expression showed appreciation for the golden green color and the steady flow rate. Would Constantine mind showing the settling room? Theodoros asked. Of course not, Constantine replied, and led both men to the adjacent chamber where vessels rested at various stages of separation. The estate owner examined the oil's clarity with knowledgeable attention, clearly understanding the processes involved and the quality indicators to observe. His questions reflected genuine interest rather than mere formality, and Constantine found himself responding with more elaboration than he typically offered. Theodoros mentioned the merchant Alexios and the favorable prices negotiated for the ancient grove oil. The estate owner expressed appreciation for Constantine's skilled work that made such transactions possible. Constantine accepted this acknowledgement with his characteristic understated grace, nodding that the trees themselves deserved credit for producing exceptional fruit, and the land for nourishing them through seasons of growth. His role simply involved careful attention to established methods, nothing more. The visit concluded after Theodoros inspected the storage room and expressed satisfaction with the organized inventory and proper maintenance of vessels. He thanked Constantine genuinely, then departed with Demetrios for inspections of other estate operations. Constantine returned to his work, feeling neither particularly elevated nor diminished by the encounter. The estate owner's approval was pleasant but not essential to his sense of accomplishment or purpose. The remainder of the day unfolded through familiar patterns. The second pressing yielded its lighter oil. Collection vessels were transferred to the settling room, and the pressing room received its routine cleaning and preparation for the next day's work. Constantine moved through these tasks with the same steady attention he brought regardless of external circumstances or observers. Late afternoon brought a break in routine when Anna appeared at the pressing room, carrying a wrapped bundle that proved to contain fresh bread and cheese. She had walked from their dwelling to bring him food, knowing that Constantine sometimes became so absorbed in work that he neglected midday meals. He accepted the offering with warm gratitude, and they sat together on the bench while he ate, and she described her morning at the loom. Anna mentioned that several other estate wives had discussed organizing a gathering for the upcoming feast day honoring the harvest. Constantine listened with mild interest, knowing his participation would likely involve attending briefly for courtesy's sake, before returning to more solitary pursuits. Anna understood his preferences and asked nothing more than his presence at appropriate moments. Their mutual acceptance of each other's natures had created a marriage of comfortable compatibility rather than passionate intensity, a partnership that suited them both completely. After Anna departed, Constantine returned to final preparations for the day's conclusion. He checked all lamps, verified that settling vessels were properly positioned and undisturbed, and ensured the pressing room stood ready for morning's resumption. The space felt particularly peaceful in the late afternoon light, dust motes visible in sunbeams slanting through high windows, the scent of olive oil permeating every surface. Constantine stood in the doorway before leaving, looking back at the pressing room with the same quiet appreciation he brought nearly every evening. This space had become almost an extension of himself over the years. Its rhythms matched his temperament, its requirements aligned with his capabilities, and its purpose gave structure and meaning to his days. He felt grateful for this alignment without needing to articulate or examine the feeling deeply. The walk home took him past the ancient olive groves, their twisted trunks casting long shadows in the declining sun. Constantine paused to rest his hand against one particularly venerable tree, feeling the rough bark beneath his palm, noting the tree's solid presence and patient endurance. These trees had stood through storms and droughts, political upheavals and regime changes, producing their fruit with reliable constancy through all circumstances. Their example offered a kind of wisdom that needed no words. Simply exist, fulfill your purpose, endure with grace. Evening settled gently over the estate as Constantine reached his dwelling. Anna had prepared their meal, and they ate together while discussing plans for the coming days. The harvest would continue for several more weeks, then gradually wind down as the last groves were processed. Constantine anticipated this eventual conclusion without eagerness or reluctance, simply accepting it as the natural progression of seasonal cycles. After the meal, Constantine sat by the hearth while Anna worked at her spinning, her wheel creating soft, rhythmic sounds that blended with the fire's crackling. His thoughts drifted through the day's events, Theodoros's visit, the quality of the Eastern Slope olives, Anna's thoughtful delivery of food, the ancient tree's solid presence. These various moments and observations floated through awareness without forming any particular pattern or conclusion, simply existing as the day's accumulated experience. He found himself thinking about the merchant Alexios and the distant markets where estate oil would eventually arrive. Constantine tried to imagine the ships that carried such cargo, vessels he had never seen sailing seas he had never visited. The mental image remained vague and uncertain, his experience providing insufficient detail to create accurate pictures. Yet the attempt pleased him somehow, this reaching toward experiences beyond his immediate world, this acknowledgement of connection to larger patterns of trade and human activity. The thoughts faded naturally as drowsiness increased. Constantine prepared for sleep with his usual routine, settling onto his pallet while evening darkness deepened outside. The estate had grown quiet, most residents having retired to their own dwellings. Only night sounds remained, distant animal calls, wind moving through trees, the occasional settling of cooling building stones. These sounds formed a peaceful backdrop to Constantine's descent into sleep. His last waking thought touched briefly on the next day's work. More olives to process, more oil to extract, the endless patient cycle continuing its rotation. Then consciousness released its hold, and Constantine drifted into darkness as complete and restful as the night surrounding the estate's sleeping buildings and silent groves. Morning came with its customary return of light and awareness. Constantine woke naturally, his body's internal timing bringing him to consciousness as dawn began illuminating the world outside. He lay still for a moment, simply noticing the transition from sleep to wakefulness, appreciating the rested feeling in his muscles and the clarity in his mind. Then he rose and began preparing for another day's work. The walk to the pressing room took him through air that carried autumn's increasing coolness. The season was advancing steadily toward winter, each morning arriving slightly later, each evening coming slightly sooner. Constantine noted these changes without concern or resistance. Winter would bring its own rhythms and requirements, different work but equally purposeful. For now, harvest continued, and his attention remained focused on present tasks rather than future transitions. Inside the pressing room, everything waited exactly as he had left it. Constantine moved through his opening preparations, his hands finding tools and adjusting equipment with the automatic precision that came from countless repetitions. The space welcomed him as it did each morning, familiar and comfortable, ready for the transformation of fruit into oil that would unfold through the day's patient hours. The sound of approaching baskets announced the arrival of fresh olives. Constantine moved to receive them, ready to begin another cycle of sorting and grinding, pressing and settling, the work that defined his days and filled his life with simple, sustaining purpose. The baskets this morning held fruit from the western groves, trees that received afternoon sun and benefited from slightly different soil composition than other sections of the estate. Constantine recognized subtle variations in the olive's appearance, a particular sheen to the skin, a marginally different weight distribution that his fingers detected without conscious measurement. These small differences would influence processing decisions in ways that remained largely intuitive, accumulated knowledge expressing itself through adjustments too subtle for verbal explanation. He began sorting with his usual methodical attention, the repetitive motion creating a meditative quality to the work. His mind settled into that particular state of quiet focus where thoughts arose and dissolved without demanding engagement, simply passing through awareness like clouds across the sky. The rhythm of his hands selecting and placing olives created a physical anchor that allowed mental stillness to deepen naturally. The morning light strengthened as he worked, sun climbing higher and sending beams through the high windows at gradually changing angles. Constantine observed these shifts peripherally, his primary attention remaining on the olives passing through his evaluation. Occasionally, his thoughts touched on practical matters. The weaver would deliver replacement mats within a few days. The storage room required additional cleaning before month's end. The ancient grove section neared completion of its harvest. These considerations arose briefly and settled back into the background, requiring no immediate action or extended contemplation. Giorgio's arrived with the mule precisely when expected, demonstrating the reliable timing that made their collaboration smooth and efficient. They exchanged simple greetings, and the grinding commenced with familiar steadiness. Constantine stood nearby, watching paste accumulate in the stone basin, while also allowing his gaze to drift toward the open doorway where morning light revealed the landscape beyond. Rolling hills covered in olive groves, distant mountains forming a backdrop of layered blue ridges, sky holding scattered clouds that moved slowly eastward. The beauty of the scene registered without generating commentary or analysis. Constantine simply looked and experienced mild pleasure at the sight, his appreciation requiring no elaboration. After a few moments, his attention returned fully to the grinding process, checking the paste's consistency and determining that sufficient progress had been made to conclude this stage. When Giorgio's departed with the mule, Constantine began the careful work of loading pressing mats. Each mat received an even distribution of paste. Each fold got executed with precise alignment. Each layer of the stack got positioned to ensure uniform pressure throughout. His work-stained hands moved with practiced confidence, the movements so deeply ingrained that conscious direction became unnecessary. His body knew this work completely, performing it with reliable competence, while his mind maintained gentle awareness without intensive focus. The pressing commenced once stones loaded the beam and weight transferred through the stacked mats. Oil began flowing almost immediately, its color today showing slightly warmer tones than previous batches, still excellent quality but reflecting the Western Grove olive's particular character. Constantine noted this variation with interest but no concern. Diversity in the estate's oil production created value, different batches serving different purposes and preferences in eventual markets. He used the pressing's duration to attend to tasks in the settling room. Several vessels had completed their separation period and required decanting. Constantine worked with careful deliberation, transferring clear oil while leaving sediment undisturbed. The process demanded steady hands and patient attention, both of which he provided without conscious effort. His movements had acquired a quality of effortless precision through thousands of repetitions, skill expressing itself so naturally that it resembled instinct rather than learned capability. While decanting, Constantine became aware of sounds from outside, children's voices carrying across the estate grounds, their play creating a distant backdrop to his solitary work. The sounds brought a slight smile to his face, though he could not have explained exactly why. Perhaps simply the reminder that life continued in its various forms and expressions, his own quiet labor existing alongside other activities and experiences throughout the estate's community. The settling room's cool dimness created an atmosphere distinct from the main pressing area. Constantine appreciated this contrast, the way different spaces within the building offered varied sensory environments. Here, scents of aging oil mixed with stone and earth smells, creating an aroma both complex and soothing. The temperature remained consistently cool regardless of external conditions, the thick walls moderating all weather extremes. He found himself lingering slightly longer than necessary, simply existing in the space and appreciating its particular qualities. Eventually, practical requirements drew him back to the pressing room. The oil flow had slowed considerably, indicating the first pressing neared completion. Constantine checked the collection basin's level and judged that sufficient volume had accumulated. He began preparations for the second pressing, adding stones to increase pressure on the already compressed mats. The afternoon aged toward evening through its customary progression. Constantine completed the second pressing, transferred all oil to appropriate vessels, and began cleaning the pressing room for the next day's work. His movements maintained their steady rhythm even as fatigue accumulated in muscles that had worked since dawn. The tiredness felt satisfying rather than burdensome, physical evidence of purposeful activity and productive accomplishment. As he worked, Constantine found himself humming again, those wordless melodies that emerged without intention. The sound rose barely above audible threshold, more vibration than music, but it created subtle accompaniment to his cleaning movements. He swept the floor with measured strokes, wiped surfaces clean of residue, and arranged tools in their designated positions. The pressing room gradually transformed from active workspace to prepared potential, ready to receive the next day's fruit and labor. The gray cat appeared as Constantine completed his tasks, settling into its usual spot and regarding him with calm feline attention. Constantine acknowledged the animal with soft words, appreciating its consistent presence without requiring interaction or response. The cat's independent companionship suited his temperament, connection without demands, presence without obligation. He stood for a moment in the pressing room center, conducting his final visual inspection of the space. Everything appeared properly organized and positioned, all requirements satisfied, the room standing ready for morning's resumption. This moment of verification before departure had become ritual over the years, a closing gesture that provided psychological completion to each work day. Constantine extinguished the lamps and stepped outside into the early evening light. The sun had dropped toward the western horizon, casting long shadows and painting the landscape in warmer tones. He paused on the threshold, breathing deeply of air that carried autumn's characteristic blend of scents: ripening fruit, drying leaves, distant wood smoke, ever-present olive perfume. The sensory richness pleased him, this abundance of subtle information about the world and season. The walk toward home took him past the well where several women gathered to draw water for evening needs. Constantine exchanged simple greetings with them, their responses carrying the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. He continued on without pausing for extended conversation, his preference for quiet solitude after work days understood and accepted by the estate's community. Anna had prepared their evening meal and sat waiting by the hearth when he arrived. They shared food and gentle talk, Anna mentioning that preparations for the harvest feast continued to develop. Several families would contribute dishes, and there would be music provided by two estate workers who played traditional instruments competently. Constantine listened with polite attention, knowing his attendance would be expected, and that he would fulfill this social obligation with adequate grace, despite his preference for quieter pursuits. After the meal, Constantine sat by the hearth while Anna returned to her textile work. The fire provided warmth against the evening's increasing coolness, its dancing flames creating ever-changing patterns of light and shadow on the room's stone walls. Constantine watched these movements with unfocused attention, his mind drifting through memories and observations without particular direction or purpose. He thought about the Western Grove olives and their subtly different characteristics, about the merchant Alexios and distant markets, about the estate owner's recent visit and expressed satisfaction. These various threads of thought wove together loosely without forming coherent narrative or reaching definite conclusions. The mental wandering felt restful rather than purposeful, his mind processing the day's accumulated experiences without analytical intensity. Drowsiness arrived gradually as the evening deepened. Constantine remained by the hearth, allowing the transition from wakefulness to sleep readiness to unfold at its own pace. His body settled into deeper relaxation, his breathing slowed to a more measured rhythm, and his thoughts became increasingly diffuse and disconnected. When sleep readiness felt complete, he rose and prepared for rest with familiar efficiency. Settled onto his pallet, Constantine allowed his eyes to close while darkness deepened outside their dwelling. The estate had grown quiet, most activity having ceased for the night. Only ambient sounds remained, wind moving through olive branches, distant animal calls, the occasional creak of settling wood and stone. These sounds formed a peaceful backdrop to his final waking moments, their gentle presence accompanying him into sleep's welcoming darkness. The night passed in deep rest, Constantine's body recovering from the day's sustained labor. While his mind wandered through dreams he would not recall upon waking. The darkness held him gently, time passing unmarked, until dawn's return brought light filtering through the small window and awareness, gradually returning to his resting form. Morning arrived with Constantine waking naturally to find early light already present. He lay still briefly, noticing the quality of rest he had received and the readiness he felt for the day ahead. Then he rose and began preparations for another cycle of work, another day of transforming olives into oil, another rotation through the timeless patterns that gave structure and meaning to his life on this Byzantine estate in the gentle hills of western Anatolia. The day began with particularly clear air, the kind of morning where distant mountains appeared closer than usual and every detail of the landscape stood out with unusual sharpness. Constantine noticed this clarity as he walked toward the pressing room, appreciating the visual richness without dwelling on it analytically. The world simply looked beautiful this morning, and that fact required no elaboration or interpretation. Inside the pressing room, he moved through his opening preparations with the same steady attention he brought each day. The space welcomed him with its familiar scents and comfortable arrangement of tools and equipment. Constantine found satisfaction in this consistency. The way each morning began from the same foundation of order and readiness. Variation came through the fruit itself and the day's particular circumstances, but the underlying structure remained reliably constant. The first baskets arrived carrying olives from groves near the estate's northern boundary, trees planted in soil that held more clay than other sections. Constantine knew these olives often required slightly longer grinding to achieve optimal paste consistency, their firmer flesh resisting breakdown more than fruit from sandier soils. He began sorting with this knowledge, informing his evaluation, his fingers detecting subtle differences in firmness and texture that confirmed his expectations. The sorting proceeded through its meditative rhythm, Constantine's hands moving steadily while his mind remained quiet and receptive. Occasionally thoughts arose, practical considerations about the day's work, brief memories of previous harvests, fleeting observations about the morning light, but none demanded sustained attention or generated extended contemplation. They simply appeared and dissolved, leaving his underlying awareness clear and peaceful. Georgios brought the mule at the customary time, and Constantine directed the animal into position for grinding. The mule had performed this work for several seasons now, its behavior showing complete familiarity with the process and requirements. Constantine appreciated the animal's steady temperament, the way it moved through its circular path without resistance or distraction. This quiet cooperation between human and animal felt like partnership rather than domination, each participant fulfilling their role in service of shared purpose. The grinding took longer than usual, as Constantine had anticipated. He monitored the paste's development with patient attention, making no attempt to rush the process despite the extended time requirement. Quality emerged from respecting the material's nature rather than imposing arbitrary schedules. When the paste finally reached proper consistency, Constantine signaled completion to Georgios and began preparing for pressing. The morning had advanced considerably by the time pressing commenced. Constantine noted this timing shift without concern. Some batches simply required more care and attention, and adjusting to these variations formed part of his craft's essential skill. He loaded the mats with particular thoroughness today, sensing that this paste would benefit from especially even distribution and careful stacking. Oil began flowing once the press engaged, though initial yield came more slowly than some batches. Constantine observed this reduced flow rate with interest but no worry. The Northern Grove olives often release their oil more gradually, requiring patience but ultimately producing excellent quality. He settled onto his bench to wait while the pressing proceeded at its own pace, allowing time to unfold without attempting to accelerate it artificially. While waiting, Constantine noticed the cat entering and making its way to the usual resting spot. The animal moved with particular slowness today, and Constantine observed more carefully, recognizing signs of advancing age in the creature's movements. The cat had appeared at the estate several years ago, already mature, and time had continued its inevitable work. Constantine felt mild sadness at this recognition, but no desire to resist or deny the natural progression. All living things moved through their cycles, and the cat's aging simply reflected universal patterns. The oil continued its patient accumulation, while Constantine's thoughts drifted to considerations of time and change. He was 41 years old, no longer young but not yet elderly, positioned in that middle period where both past and future held substantial weight. His body still performed work capably, though he noticed small changes, slightly longer recovery from sustained effort, occasional stiffness in joints that once moved without resistance, subtle shifts in energy and endurance. These changes arrived gradually enough to remain manageable, requiring adaptation rather than radical adjustment. His thoughts moved to Anna and their 20 years of marriage, 2 decades that had passed with remarkable swiftness despite being filled with countless individual days. Their life together had settled into patterns that felt both comfortable and slightly worn, like the pressing room's ancient timbers that bore marks of long use while maintaining their essential function. He felt gratitude for this partnership, without needing it to provide excitement or novelty. Stability and mutual support offered their own deep value. The pressing's pace remained steady but slow. Constantine checked the collection basin periodically, noting gradual increase in accumulated oil. The color appeared particularly rich today, darker gold with green undertones that indicated high quality despite the extended extraction time. This observation brought quiet satisfaction, patience rewarded, care vindicated, traditional methods proving their continued worth. Midday arrived with Constantine still monitoring the first pressing. He ate bread and cheese that Anna had provided earlier, simple food consumed without interrupting his watchfulness over the process. The pressing room's temperature had increased with the sun's ascent, though thick walls prevented excessive heat accumulation. Constantine appreciated this moderation, the building's design creating livable conditions throughout seasonal variations. By early afternoon, the first pressing had finally completed its work. Constantine began preparations for the second pressing, adding stones to increase pressure on the now compressed mats. This stage would likely also proceed slowly given the olive's resistant nature, but he accepted this requirement without impatience. Some days unfolded quickly, others demanded extended time. Both patterns had their place in the harvest's rhythm. While the second pressing proceeded, Constantine moved to the settling room to check vessels from previous days. The routine inspection revealed everything progressing properly, separation occurring as expected, quality maintained throughout. He began decanting one batch that had completed its settling period, working with the careful precision this task always required. The afternoon light slanted through the settling room's limited windows, creating subtle illumination that shifted gradually as time passed. Constantine worked within this changing light, his movements adapted to varying visibility without conscious adjustment. The decanting proceeded smoothly, clear oil transferring to storage jars, while sediment remained undisturbed in the original vessels. When this task concluded, Constantine carried the filled jars to the main storage room. The accumulated inventory had grown substantially over recent weeks, rows of vessels representing the harvest's ongoing productivity. He conducted his customary inspection, checking seals and conditions, verifying that everything remained properly maintained. The cool dimness of the storage room created an atmosphere of preservation and patient waiting. The oil resting here would sustain the estate and serve distant markets through the coming year. Constantine returned to the pressing room to find the second pressing continuing its gradual work. The flow had slowed to irregular drops, each one forming and falling at unpredictable intervals. He watched this process for several moments, finding something almost hypnotic in the random timing. Drop, pause, drop, longer pause, another drop. The irregularity created its own peculiar rhythm, pattern emerging from apparent randomness. Evening approached as the second pressing finally completed. Constantine performed his closing procedures with perhaps slightly more fatigue than usual, the day's extended work having demanded sustained attention over longer duration. Still, the tiredness felt manageable and even satisfying, evidence of thorough completion rather than mere exhaustion. He cleaned the pressing room with his characteristic attention to detail, ensuring everything stood ready for the next morning despite his body's desire for rest. The discipline of maintaining standards regardless of personal state had been ingrained through years of practice. Quality and consistency mattered more than temporary comfort or convenience. The gray cat remained in its resting spot, apparently having slept through most of the afternoon. Constantine paused to observe the animal before departing, noting its peaceful repose and steady breathing. The cat's contentment in simply existing provided a kind of wordless teaching. Presence itself held value. Activity need not dominate every moment. Rest formed an essential component of life's rhythm. Constantine extinguished the lamps and stepped outside into the early evening light. The air had cooled considerably from midday's warmth, autumn's progression toward winter becoming increasingly evident. He walked homeward through this cooling air, his body appreciating the temperature's refreshing quality after hours in the pressing room's enclosed atmosphere. Anna had prepared their evening meal and greeted him with gentle inquiry about his day. Constantine described the challenging batch of Northern Grove olives, explaining how their resistant nature had required extended processing time. Anna listened with genuine interest, her questions demonstrating understanding of his work's demands and variations. Their conversation flowed easily, two people comfortable enough with each other to share thoughts without performance or pretense. After the meal, Constantine settled by the hearth while physical fatigue accumulated into deep relaxation. His muscles released their sustained tension, his breathing deepened into a slower rhythm, and his mind drifted into that twilight state between full awareness and approaching sleep. The fire's warmth surrounded him like an embrace, and he allowed himself to simply rest in this comfortable state without fighting the drowsiness that increased steadily. Eventually, he roused himself enough to prepare properly for sleep, moving to his pallet where deeper rest awaited. The day had brought its challenges and satisfactions, its particular character distinct from other days, while also fitting seamlessly into the larger pattern of harvest season. Constantine felt the deep contentment that formed his emotional baseline settling over him completely as consciousness released its hold and sleep arrived to carry him into darkness. The following morning brought cooler temperatures and a thin mist that clung to the valley floors and drifted through the olive groves in translucent veils. Constantine walked through this atmospheric moisture on his way to the pressing room, feeling its dampness on his face and in his hair. The mist softened all edges and muted colors, creating a dreamlike quality to the familiar landscape. He found the altered appearance pleasant, this temporary transformation that would dissolve once the sun climbed higher and warmed the air sufficiently. Inside the pressing room, he began his preparations while mist still obscured the view through the high windows. The interior felt particularly enclosed this morning, separated from the outside world by layers of fog that created unusual privacy and quiet. Constantine moved through his opening tasks with perhaps slightly slower movements than usual, matching his pace to the morning's contemplative atmosphere. The baskets arrived carrying olives from groves midway up the estate's southern slopes, trees that benefited from excellent drainage and received full sun throughout most of the day. Constantine recognized these olives as typically producing oil of balanced character, neither exceptionally bold nor particularly mild, but consistently reliable in quality and yield. He began sorting with appreciation for this dependability, the way certain groves could be counted upon to provide steady results year after year. His work-stained hands moved through the fruit with their accustomed rhythm, selecting and placing, evaluating and approving. The repetitive motion created space for his mind to wander gently, thoughts drifting through various considerations without settling on any single topic for extended focus. He thought briefly about the upcoming harvest feast, about the gray cat's advancing age, about the mist outside, and how it would eventually burn away. These thoughts arose and dissolved like the mist itself, present temporarily before fading back into the general flow of awareness. The mule and Giorgio's arrived punctually, and grinding commenced with familiar steadiness. Constantine stood nearby, watching paste accumulate while also listening to sounds from outside, muffled by mist. Voices and footsteps seemed to come from greater distances than usual, creating the impression that the estate had expanded beyond its actual boundaries. The auditory distortion interested him mildly, this reminder of how atmospheric conditions could alter perception and experience. As morning progressed, sunlight began penetrating the mist and gradually dissolving it. Constantine observed this transformation through the high windows, watching visibility increase incrementally as fog thinned and retreated. By the time grinding concluded, the mist had largely dissipated, leaving only traces in the deepest valley sections. The world had returned to its normal appearance, the brief period of atmospheric transformation complete. Constantine began loading pressing mats with the ground paste, his movements precise and unhurried. The paste showed excellent consistency, neither too dry nor excessively moist, indicating optimal grinding time and proper fruit condition. He He spread it evenly across each mat's surface, his attention focused completely on achieving uniform distribution. This care would ensure even pressure throughout the stack and maximize extraction efficiency. The pressing commenced once stones loaded the beam and weight transferred downward. Oil began flowing immediately, its color showing the balanced golden green that Constantine associated with southern slope olives. The flow rate appeared healthy, neither rushing nor sluggish, settling into a steady rhythm that would continue for hours. He positioned collection vessels carefully, then stepped back to observe the initial accumulation with quiet satisfaction. With the pressing underway, Constantine turned attention to maintenance tasks that often got postponed during busier periods. The wooden press beam required treatment with oil to prevent cracking and maintain flexibility. He retrieved a vessel of refined oil reserved for this purpose and began applying it to the beam's surface with a clean cloth. His movements were slow and thorough, working the oil into the wood's grain, paying particular attention to areas showing slight dryness. The task brought him into intimate contact with the press itself, his hands moving across surfaces that had supported countless harvests over decades of service. Constantine felt a connection to all the previous workers who had maintained this equipment, an unbroken chain of hands caring for the same tools and structures. The thought created a sense of participation in something larger than his individual life, a continuation of tradition that extended both backward and forward in time. He completed the beam treatment and moved on to checking the millstone's condition. The grinding surface showed expected wear patterns, gradual erosion from processing thousands of baskets of olives. The wear remained within acceptable limits, but Constantine made a mental note that replacement would become necessary within perhaps 2 more harvest seasons. Planning for such eventualities helped prevent disruptions and maintained operational continuity. The midday hours passed quietly, Constantine working through his various maintenance tasks, while the pressing proceeded steadily in the background. The rhythmic dripping of oil into the collection basin provided constant acoustic accompaniment, a sound so familiar that he registered it only at the edge of awareness. The pressing room held an atmosphere of productive peace, purposeful activity unfolding without urgency or tension. By early afternoon, Constantine paused from his maintenance work to eat the simple meal Anna had provided. He sat on his customary bench, chewing slowly while allowing his body to rest. The food tasted good, fresh bread with herbs baked into it, cheese from the estate's dairy, olives cured earlier in the season. Simple ingredients prepared competently, nothing remarkable yet entirely satisfying. While eating, Constantine noticed the cat had not appeared at its usual time. He considered this absence briefly, wondering if the animal's age had finally progressed to the point of limiting its movement. The thought created mild concern but no alarm. Cats lived their lives according to their own logic, appearing and disappearing as suited their needs and preferences. Still, the absence registered as a small change in the day's expected pattern. After finishing his meal, Constantine returned to checking the first pressing. The flow had slowed considerably, indicating the stage neared completion. He prepared for the transition to second pressing, gathering additional stones and readying the mats for restacking with increased pressure. These preparations required no conscious thought, his body moving through familiar motions while his mind remained quiet and receptive. The second pressing began, and Constantine used this time to visit the settling room. Several vessels required attention, some ready for decanting, others needing inspection to verify proper separation progress. He worked methodically through these tasks, his movements efficient but never rushed, each vessel receiving appropriate care and evaluation. One container showed slight cloudiness that concerned him initially, but closer examination revealed nothing problematic, simply a batch requiring additional settling time before reaching optimal clarity. Constantine made a mental note to check this particular vessel again in 2 days, allowing the separation process additional time to complete fully. Patience often resolved apparent problems, and premature intervention could create difficulties where none actually existed. The afternoon aged toward evening through its gradual progression. Constantine completed the settling room tasks and returned to the pressing room to find the second pressing nearing completion. He began his closing procedures slightly earlier than usual, motivated partly by desire to check on the gray cat before full darkness arrived. The pressing room received its customary thorough cleaning, tools arranged properly, everything prepared for the next morning's work. Constantine performed these tasks with his characteristic attention, despite the distraction of concern about the cat. Discipline meant maintaining standards regardless of personal preoccupations or emotional states. When everything stood ready, Constantine extinguished the lamps and stepped outside into the early evening light. Instead of immediately heading home, he walked around the pressing building's exterior, calling softly for the cat. He checked the usual spots where the animal sometimes rested, beneath a nearby olive tree, along the building's sunny southern wall, near the storage room's entrance. After several minutes of searching, Constantine found the cat in a sheltered corner formed by the pressing building and an adjacent stone wall. The animal lay curled tightly, breathing shallowly, clearly in the final stages of its life. Constantine knelt beside it, his work-stained hand gently touching the gray fur. The cat's eyes opened briefly, recognizing his presence without alarm, then closed again as breathing continued its shallow rhythm. Constantine remained kneeling there, his hand resting lightly on the cat's side, feeling each breath and the gradual slowing of the animal's heartbeat. He felt sadness at this ending, but also acceptance of its naturalness and inevitability. The cat had lived its life, performed its role in the estate's ecosystem, and now approached death with the same quiet dignity it had brought to all its activities. The evening light faded gradually while Constantine kept his vigil. The cat's breathing grew increasingly irregular, long pauses between each shallow intake. Constantine continued his gentle contact, offering the comfort of presence during this final transition. When the last breath came and the small body grew still beneath his hand, he remained kneeling for several more moments, acknowledging the completion and feeling gratitude for the animal's companionship over the years of its residence at the pressing building. Eventually, Constantine rose, his knees stiff from prolonged kneeling on cold ground. He would need to bury the cat properly, but that task could wait until morning when light made such work easier. For now, he simply covered the small body with a piece of clean cloth from the pressing room, protecting it from nocturnal scavengers while providing a measure of dignity. The walk home felt heavier than usual, though Constantine could not entirely explain why. The cat's death represented a small loss in the grand scheme of things, yet it touched him more deeply than he might have anticipated. Perhaps because the animal had formed part of his daily routine for several years, its presence woven into the fabric of his work life. Or perhaps simply because death always carried weight, regardless of whose life ended or what that life had encompassed. Anna noticed his subdued mood immediately upon his arrival. Constantine explained about the cat, and she responded with gentle sympathy, understanding that the loss held meaning despite the animal's lack of formal importance. They ate their evening meal in quieter conversation than usual, both respecting the small grief that needed acknowledgement even if it required no elaborate expression. After the meal, Constantine sat by the hearth and allowed himself to simply feel the sadness without resistance or analysis. The deep contentment that formed his emotional baseline would return. It always did. But for this evening, melancholy held legitimate claim on his inner state. He accepted this temporary shift with the same equanimity he brought to other life circumstances, neither clinging to it nor rushing to dismiss it prematurely. Sleep came eventually, carrying Constantine into darkness where dreams mixed memories of the gray cat with images of olive groves and pressing rooms, the various elements of his life combining in the surreal logic of unconscious processing. Morning would return to routine, the cat's absence creating a small, empty space that would gradually close as new patterns established themselves. But for now, sleep provided respite and restoration, the body's wisdom offering healing through rest and the passage of unmarked time. Morning arrived with Constantine waking to gray light filtering through the small window, clouds having moved in overnight to cover the sky. He dressed quietly and stepped outside into cool, still air that carried the particular weight of impending rain. The walk to the pressing room took him past the spot where the cat lay beneath its cloth covering, and he paused there briefly, acknowledging the task that awaited him before the day's regular work could begin. He retrieved a wooden spade from the tool storage and selected a location near the edge of the olive grove, where the earth appeared softer and easier to work. The digging proceeded slowly, his movements methodical as he excavated a hole of appropriate depth. The physical labor felt meditative, repetitive motion creating space for his mind to process the previous evening's sadness while his body engaged in purposeful activity. When the hole reached sufficient depth, Constantine returned to collect the cat's small body. He carried it carefully to the prepared grave and lowered it gently, arranging the cloth around it with respectful attention. Then he began filling the hole, earth covering the form gradually until only bare ground remained visible. He patted the surface flat and placed several stones to mark the spot, creating a simple memorial that required no elaborate significance to serve its purpose. The completion of this task brought a sense of closure that allowed Constantine to turn his attention fully toward the day's pressing work. He returned the spade to storage and began his usual opening preparations, the familiar routine providing comfort through its established patterns. The pressing room welcomed him as it did each morning, unchanged by external events or personal circumstances, reliably constant in its purpose and requirements. Baskets arrived carrying olives from groves on the estate's eastern boundary, fruit he had not yet processed this season. Constantine began sorting with fresh attention, observing characteristics specific to these particular trees. The olives showed good size and firmness, their color indicating proper ripeness, their overall condition suggesting they would yield well. He worked through the sorting with his customary thoroughness, his earlier sadness gradually receding into the background as immediate tasks claimed his focus. The first drops of rain began falling just as Georgios arrived with the mule. Both men glanced upward at the darkening sky, exchanging brief comments about the weather's timing. The rain would likely continue through much of the day, but the pressing room's solid roof provided complete shelter, and the work could proceed without interruption. Constantine felt mild gratitude for this protection, the ancient building continuing to serve its purpose through yet another harvest season. Grinding commenced with rain creating a gentle percussion on the roof tiles overhead. The sound added a new dimension to the pressing room's acoustic environment, a natural rhythm that complemented the mule's steady footfalls and the gradual crushing of olives into paste. Constantine found the combination soothing, these layered sounds creating an atmosphere of sheltered productivity, while weather moved through the landscape outside. The morning progressed through its established sequence, each stage unfolding at its proper pace while rain continued falling. Constantine moved between tasks with familiar efficiency, monitoring the grinding, preparing mats, positioning stones, initiating the pressing. The work absorbed his attention fully, leaving little mental space for dwelling on the cat's death or other concerns beyond immediate requirements. Oil began flowing once the press engaged, its color showing the typical characteristics of eastern boundary olives, slightly lighter gold than some batches, but with excellent clarity and pleasant aroma. Constantine positioned collection vessels and settled onto his bench to observe the initial accumulation. Rain continued its steady sound overhead, creating a cocoon of weather that separated the pressing room from the wider world. While waiting for the pressing to proceed, Constantine allowed his thoughts to drift without particular direction. He considered the harvest's overall progress, mentally calculating that approximately 2/3 of the estate's groves had now been processed. The remaining third would occupy perhaps another 2 to 3 weeks, depending on weather and fruit ripening schedules. Then the pressing season would conclude, and winter work would begin, maintenance and repair tasks, preparation for the next year's harvest, quieter rhythms replacing autumn's sustained activity. The thought of seasonal transition brought no resistance or reluctance. Constantine understood and accepted life's cyclical nature, the way different periods brought different requirements and opportunities. Winter held its own satisfactions, time for thorough equipment maintenance, opportunities for reflection and planning, reduced physical demands that allowed the body to recover from harvest's sustained exertion. His contemplation ended naturally as practical matters required attention. The first pressing had progressed sufficiently to begin preparations for the second stage. Constantine rose from his bench and began the familiar process of adding stones to increase pressure. His movements practiced and efficient despite the slight stiffness in his joints from prolonged sitting. The rain intensified through midday, heavy drops drumming more loudly against the roof. Constantine paused occasionally to look through the high windows at the weather, observing how rain transformed the landscape into softer, hazier versions of familiar forms. The olive groves appeared almost gray-green through the downpour, their usual distinct features blurred into general impressions. He found this visual transformation interesting. The way weather could temporarily remake the world's appearance while leaving its essential nature unchanged. By early afternoon, the rain had settled into steady moderate intensity that would likely continue for hours. Constantine worked through his various tasks, monitoring pressings, transferring oil to settling vessels, conducting routine maintenance, while rain provided constant acoustic backdrop. The pressing room's interior felt particularly cozy under these conditions, a dry shelter surrounded by falling water, warmth and productivity existing within protective walls. During a brief pause in his work, Constantine noticed a small leak developing in one section of the roof. Water dripped slowly through a gap between tiles, forming a puddle on the stone floor. He positioned a ceramic bowl to catch the drips, then made a mental note to inspect the roof more thoroughly once weather cleared. The leak appeared minor, nothing that threatened the work or equipment, but it required attention before becoming more serious. The afternoon aged toward evening while rain continued unabated. Constantine completed the day's pressing operations and began his closing procedures with perhaps slightly less thoroughness than usual, motivated by desire to return home before darkness combined with rain to make the walk more difficult. Still, he maintained essential standards: lamps extinguished safely, vessels properly positioned, workspace adequately tidied. He stepped outside into the rain, pulling his cloak tight and adjusting its hood to provide maximum coverage. The walk home proceeded through heavy precipitation, water soaking into his garments despite the cloak's protection. Constantine accepted this wetness without complaint, recognizing it as temporary discomfort rather than genuine hardship. The rain nourished the land and filled the cisterns. Its benefits far outweighed the inconvenience it created for his brief journey. Anna had kept their dwelling warm and had prepared hot soup for the evening meal. Constantine appreciated both thoughtful provisions, the warmth driving chill from his body while the soup's heat spread through his core. They ate together while rain continued outside, their conversation turning to practical matters: the roof leak that required repair, preparations still needed for the upcoming harvest feast, winter provisions that would soon require attention. After the meal, Constantine removed his wet outer garments and settled close to the hearth. The fire's warmth and the day's sustained activity combined to create deep physical relaxation. His muscles released their accumulated tension, his breathing deepened into a slower rhythm, and his mind drifted into that peaceful state between full wakefulness and approaching sleep. He thought briefly about the cat buried near the olive grove, already becoming a memory rather than a daily presence. The sadness had diminished considerably from the previous evening's acute grief, fatting into gentler melancholy that he knew would continue lessening with each passing day. Life moved forward, carrying losses along with continuities, endings alongside ongoing patterns. Constantine accepted this movement without resistance, understanding that clinging to what had passed served no useful purpose. The fire burned lower as evening deepened into night. Rain continued its steady sound on the roof, a backdrop that had persisted through the entire day and would likely continue through the night hours. Constantine prepared for sleep, while Anna banked the fire to maintain coals through the darkness. They settled onto their respective pallets, the dwelling's interior warm despite the cold rain falling outside. Constantine's last waking thoughts touched on the next day's work. More olives to process, the roof leak to monitor, the steady progression of harvest continuing toward its eventual completion. Then consciousness released its hold, and sleep arrived to carry him into darkness where rest and restoration proceeded without his awareness or participation. The night passed in deep sleep, Constantine's body recovering its strength, while rain continued washing the landscape. Dreams came and went, their content dissolving upon waking so completely that no trace remained in conscious memory. Morning arrived with Constantine waking naturally to find rain still falling, though less intensely than the previous day. He rose and began preparing for another day's work, another rotation through the familiar cycle that gave structure and purpose to his life on this Byzantine estate where olives grew and rain fell, and the patient work of pressing continued through all weather and seasons. The rain had softened to intermittent drizzle by the time Constantine reached the pressing room, the sky still overcast but showing hints of lighter gray where clouds had begun to thin. He entered the building and immediately checked the bowl he had positioned beneath the roof leak. It held perhaps 2 fingers' depth of water, confirming the leak remained minor but present. He emptied the bowl outside and returned it to its position, resolving to inspect the roof thoroughly once conditions permitted safe climbing. The morning's work began with olives from groves planted during his father's youth, trees now in their most productive years. Constantine recognized these olives by subtle markers, their particular shape, the way they clustered on branches, characteristics his father had pointed out decades ago during Constantine's apprenticeship. These small continuities of knowledge pleased him, the way information passed from generation to generation through observation and shared experience rather than formal instruction. He sorted the fruit with his usual care, his work-stained hands moving through familiar motions while his mind wandered gently. The pressing room felt particularly peaceful this morning, the drizzle creating soft sounds on the roof without the intensity of yesterday's downpour. Light filtered through the high windows in muted tones, casting the interior in gentle illumination that suited the day's quiet atmosphere. Giorgio's arrived with the mule precisely on time despite the damp conditions. The animal's coat showed darker coloring where moisture had penetrated, but it moved into position willingly and began its circular path without hesitation. Constantine appreciated this reliability, the way both man and beast brought consistent effort regardless of weather or minor discomforts. The grinding commenced with its steady rhythm, paste accumulating while morning gradually brightened as clouds continued thinning. By the time grinding concluded, the drizzle had ceased entirely, and patches of blue sky had begun appearing between the remaining clouds. Constantine paused to observe this transformation, watching sunlight break through in scattered beams that illuminated portions of the landscape while leaving others still in shadow. The interplay of light and darkness across the hills created visual drama that he found quietly beautiful, though he felt no need to articulate or analyze this appreciation. The pressing proceeded smoothly once mats were loaded and stones positioned. Oil flowed with healthy consistency, its color showing the rich characteristics Constantine associated with these mid-age groves. He found himself humming while monitoring the flow, those wordless melodies emerging naturally to complement the pressing room's peaceful atmosphere. The sound rose barely above whisper level, more internal vibration than external music, but it settled his mind into deeper contentment. While the first pressing continued, Constantine decided to inspect the roof despite residual dampness that might make surfaces slippery. He retrieved a ladder from storage and positioned it carefully against the building's exterior wall, testing its stability before beginning his ascent. The climb proceeded cautiously, his movements deliberate as he reached the roof's edge and pulled himself onto the tiles. The roof's surface showed wear patterns consistent with its age and long service. Most tiles remained secure and properly positioned, but Constantine located the source of the leak. Several tiles had shifted slightly, creating gaps where water could penetrate during heavy rain. He examined the surrounding area carefully, noting that additional tiles showed signs of potential loosening that could create future problems if left unaddressed. The repair would require replacing several tiles and rescuing others, work best accomplished on a fully dry day with proper materials and adequate time. Constantine made mental notes about what would be needed: replacement tiles from the estate's stores, fresh mortar for securing them, perhaps a full day devoted to thorough roof maintenance rather than attempting quick fixes. Planning such comprehensive attention would prevent recurring problems and ensure the building's continued weathertight integrity. He descended the ladder carefully and returned it to storage, satisfied that he had identified the issue and could address it properly during the next suitable opportunity. The pressing room would remain functional even with the minor leak, the bowl catching any water that entered, so no urgent crisis demanded immediate action. Still, Constantine appreciated having a clear understanding of what required attention and how to proceed when conditions allowed. The day progressed through its familiar patterns. The first pressing completed, the second pressing began, and Constantine moved between various tasks with practiced efficiency. The sun emerged more fully as afternoon approached, warming the air and beginning the process of drying surfaces that rain had saturated over the previous day and night. Steam rose visibly from stone walls where sunlight struck wet surfaces, creating ephemeral wisps that dissolved quickly into the warming atmosphere. Constantine found himself thinking about his father while working through the afternoon's tasks. The older man had taught him this craft through patient demonstration and gentle correction, rarely offering explicit instruction, but consistently modeling proper technique and thorough attention to quality. Constantine realized he had absorbed not just technical skills, but also his father's approach to work itself. The unhurried pace, the respect for materials and tools, the commitment to consistency regardless of external pressures or temporary circumstances. These thoughts created a sense of gratitude that needed no particular expression or elaboration. Constantine simply acknowledged inwardly that his life's work had been shaped by good teaching, and that he had been fortunate in his apprenticeship. The recognition brought warmth that had nothing to do with the sun now filling the pressing room with afternoon light. By late afternoon, Constantine had completed the day's pressing operations and begun his closing procedures. The bowl beneath the roof leak held only a few drops of water, confirming that the leak caused problems only during heavy precipitation. He emptied it once more and left it in position, knowing that more rain would eventually come, and the temporary solution would continue serving adequately until proper repairs could be completed. The walk home took him through the landscape transformed by the previous day's rain and today's emerging sunshine. Everything appeared freshly washed, colors more vivid, the air carrying scents released by moisture, earth and vegetation, stone and growing things. Constantine breathed deeply of this aromatic richness, appreciating the sensory abundance without needing to catalog or name individual components. The overall effect simply pleased him, adding another layer of satisfaction to the day's accumulated experience. Anna had prepared their evening meal and greeted him with news that the harvest feast had been scheduled for 3 days hence, on the upcoming rest day when most estate work would pause. Constantine acknowledged this information with mild interest, knowing his attendance would be expected, and that he would fulfill this social obligation with adequate grace. The feast represented community celebration of harvest success, and his participation honored both the work and the workers who had contributed to the season's productivity. They ate together while discussing practical preparations, what contribution they might bring to the communal meal, what garments would be appropriate for the occasion, what time they should arrive to show proper respect without appearing overly eager. These details required attention, but created no stress or anxiety. Constantine approached social obligations with the same methodical planning he brought to his pressing work, ensuring adequate preparation while maintaining emotional equilibrium. After the meal, Constantine sat by the hearth and allowed his body to settle into deep relaxation. The day had brought varied activities, regular pressing work, roof inspection, planning for future maintenance, and his muscles appreciated the opportunity to release their accumulated tension. He sat quietly, watching firelight dance across the walls, his mind drifting through disconnected thoughts that required no sustained attention or analysis. He found himself thinking about the upcoming conclusion of harvest season, now visible on the horizon though still several weeks distant. The transition to winter rhythms would bring changes in daily routine and activity focus, yet the fundamental pattern of his life would continue unchanged. Wake, work, rest, sleep. This basic cycle persisted through all seasons and circumstances, providing reliable structure regardless of specific tasks or external conditions. The thought created neither excitement nor dread, simply quiet acceptance of life's ongoing nature. Constantine understood that his days would continue unfolding in their established patterns until age or illness disrupted the routine, and even then, Some version of daily rhythm would persist as long as consciousness remained. This recognition brought peace rather than melancholy. Life was what it was, and he had found his place within it. Drowsiness began accumulating as evening deepened toward night. Constantine remained by the hearth until sleep readiness felt complete, then rose and prepared for rest with his customary efficiency. Anna had already settled onto her pallet, and Constantine joined her in the darkness, their dwelling quiet except for the fire's fatting crackles and the occasional settling of cooling timbers. His last waking thoughts touched briefly on the next day's work, more olives to process, continued monitoring of the roof leak, the ongoing progression toward harvest's eventual completion. Then consciousness dissolved into sleep's welcoming darkness, and Constantine drifted into rest while the night deepened around their dwelling and the estate settled into its own quiet rhythms of nocturnal existence. Morning would bring its return of light and activity, another day's rotation through the familiar cycle, another opportunity to engage with work that gave purpose and structure to his life. But for now, sleep held him gently, offering restoration and renewal through the mysterious processes that occurred beyond awareness or conscious participation. The body's wisdom providing healing and strength for whatever the next day might bring. The next morning arrived with clear skies and air that carried autumn's increasing crispness. Constantine woke to find sunlight already streaming through the window, the brightness indicating he had slept slightly later than usual. He dressed without hurry and stepped outside into a world that seemed freshly made, the recent rain having washed away accumulated dust and left everything gleaming in the morning light. The walk to the pressing room took him past the spot where he had buried the cat several days earlier. The disturbed earth had already begun settling, and a few fallen olive leaves had scattered across the small grave. Constantine paused there briefly, acknowledging the memory without dwelling in sadness. The cat had lived and died, and life continued its forward movement. This simple fact required no elaborate interpretation or extended mourning. Inside the pressing room, he found everything exactly as he had left it. The bowl beneath the roof leak held no water, confirming that yesterday's sunshine had dried the tiles sufficiently to prevent further seepage. Constantine moved through his opening preparations with familiar efficiency, his body settling into the work's rhythm while his mind remained quiet and receptive to the day's unfolding. The morning's baskets contained olives from groves on the estate's western slopes, fruit he had processed earlier in the season, but from different sections of those same hillsides. Constantine recognized subtle variations even within the same general area. These particular trees received slightly less direct sunlight due to a fold in the terrain, and their olives showed marginally smaller size as a result. The difference would be imperceptible to casual observation, but Constantine's years of experience had trained him to notice such details. He began sorting with his customary attention, his work-stained fingers moving through the fruit while his thoughts drifted to the upcoming harvest feast. Constantine found himself curious about which families would attend and what dishes they might contribute. The estate's community included people from various backgrounds and regions, their culinary traditions creating interesting diversity when gathered for communal meals. He anticipated this variety without strong preference for any particular outcome. The gathering would be what it would be, and he would participate with appropriate courtesy. Georgios arrived with the mule, and grinding commenced with its steady circular motion. The morning had warmed considerably as the sun climbed higher, and Constantine opened additional windows to encourage air circulation through the pressing room. Fresh breezes carried scents from outside: olive leaves, warm stone, distant wood smoke from the estate's various hearths. These aromas mingled with the pressing room's inherent smell of olive oil and ancient timber, creating an olfactory blend that Constantine found deeply pleasant. The paste developed properly under the millstone's patient crushing, its texture reaching optimal consistency as grinding concluded. Constantine directed Georgios to halt the mule, then began the familiar process of loading pressing mats. His movements had acquired an almost meditative quality through countless repetitions, his hands knowing exactly how to spread paste evenly and fold mats precisely, without requiring conscious direction from his mind. Once the pressing engaged and oil began flowing, Constantine settled onto his bench with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The work was proceeding well, the harvest continued its steady progression, and the day held the pleasant warmth of late autumn sunshine. He allowed himself to simply rest in this moment of contentment, appreciating the convergence of favorable circumstances without feeling the need to grasp or prolong it artificially. While observing the oil's accumulation, Constantine noticed a small spider constructing a web in the corner where the pressing beam met the stone wall. The creature worked with remarkable patience and precision, each strand placed deliberately as the web gradually took shape. Constantine watched this construction process with mild fascination, recognizing parallels between the spider's methodical work and his own approach to pressing olives. Both required patience, attention to detail, and trust in established patterns that had proven effective through countless iterations. The spider completed its web and settled into waiting stillness at the center. Constantine returned his attention to the pressing, checking the collection basin's level and noting that accumulation proceeded at expected rates. Everything unfolded as it should, the day moving forward through its natural progression, without complications or disruptions requiring his intervention. By midday, the first pressing had completed, and Constantine began preparations for the second stage. He worked with easy efficiency, adding stones to increase pressure while also conducting a quick inspection of the press beam to verify that yesterday's oil treatment had been properly absorbed. The wood showed healthy condition, its surface smooth and slightly lustrous, indicating that the maintenance had achieved its intended purpose. The second pressing commenced, and Constantine used this interval to visit the settling room. Multiple vessels required attention, some ready for decanting, others needing inspection to assess separation progress. He moved methodically through these tasks, his observant nature noting details that informed decisions about timing and handling. One vessel showed exceptional clarity already, its oil having separated completely in less time than typical. Constantine attributed this accelerated process to the particular characteristics of the fruit from which it came, though he couldn't identify precisely which factors had influenced the outcome. He decanted the clear oil carefully, his hands steady as golden green liquid flowed into storage jars. The quality appeared excellent, and Constantine felt quiet pride in this result despite knowing that the oil's character came primarily from the fruit itself, rather than his processing skill. Still, proper technique had preserved and perhaps slightly enhanced what nature had provided. This contribution held value even if it remained secondary to the olive's inherent qualities. The afternoon progressed through its familiar rhythms. Constantine completed the settling room tasks and returned to monitor the second pressing, which continued its gradual extraction. He cleaned tools that had accumulated residue, organized his workspace to improve efficiency, and attended to various small maintenance needs that often got postponed during busier periods. These activities filled the time productively while requiring relatively little concentration or physical exertion. Late afternoon brought Demetrios to the pressing room, the overseer stopping by to confirm details about the harvest feast. He mentioned that Theodoros, the estate owner, would be attending and wished to personally thank workers for the season's success. This information held practical implications. Constantine should ensure he appeared presentable and prepared to receive such acknowledgement gracefully. Demetrios also mentioned that the feast would include music and perhaps some dancing, traditional celebrations that marked the harvest's peak and honored the community's collaborative efforts. After Demetrios departed, Constantine considered these details with mild interest but no particular anxiety. He had attended similar gatherings in previous years and knew what would be expected: polite conversation, modest acceptance of any praise offered, general friendliness without excessive gregariousness. He could fulfill these social requirements adequately, though they required more conscious effort than his solitary work in the pressing room. The day's work concluded as evening approached. Constantine performed his closing procedures with thorough attention, ensuring everything stood ready for the next morning's resumption. He checked the bowl beneath the roof leak one final time and found it empty, confirming that the recent clear weather had eliminated moisture problems temporarily. Proper repairs remained necessary, but could wait for the most opportune moment when time and conditions aligned favorably. The walk home took him through golden evening light that painted the landscape in warm tones. Long shadows stretched across the ground, and the air had begun cooling as the sun descended toward the western horizon. Constantine breathed deeply of this comfortable temperature, appreciating the balance between days' lingering warmth and evenings' arriving coolness. Anna greeted him with news that she had been working on preparing their contribution to the harvest feast, a large quantity of flatbread seasoned with herbs from their small garden. The bread rested on cooling racks, filling their dwelling with pleasant aromas that reminded Constantine he had eaten only lightly during the day. They shared their evening meal while discussing final preparations for the upcoming gathering, their conversation easy and practical, two people comfortable enough with each other that planning required minimal negotiation or compromise. After the meal, Constantine sat by the hearth and allowed the day's accumulated fatigue to express itself through deep physical relaxation. His muscles released their sustained tension, his breathing slowed into a restful rhythm, and his mind drifted into that peaceful state where thoughts arose and dissolved without creating engagement or disturbance. The fire provided warmth and flickering light, its dancing flames creating ever-changing patterns that held his unfocused attention. He thought briefly about the spider's web in the pressing room, wondering if the creature had caught anything in its delicate construction. The thought led nowhere in particular, simply floating through awareness before fading like smoke. Constantine accepted this mental wandering without attempting to direct or control it, allowing his mind the same rest his body enjoyed. Drowsiness accumulated gradually as evening deepened into night. Constantine remained by the hearth until sleep readiness felt complete, then rose and prepared for rest. Anna had already settled onto her pallet, and Constantine joined her in the darkness, their dwelling quiet except for the fire's gentle sounds and the occasional creak of cooling timbers. Sleep arrived naturally, carrying Constantine into darkness where dreams moved through consciousness, without leaving traces he would remember upon waking. The night passed in deep rest, his body recovering strength while the world continued its quiet existence beyond the walls of their small dwelling. Morning would bring another day, another rotation through familiar patterns, and eventually, the harvest feast that would mark a moment of communal celebration within the season's ongoing work. But for now, rest claimed him completely, offering renewal through the mysterious processes of sleep. The morning light continues streaming through the pressing room's high windows, and Constantine moves through his work with the same steady patience he has brought to every task, every season. The rhythms of the harvest carry on, olives arriving in their baskets, the millstone turning its endless circles, oil flowing golden green into waiting vessels. Outside, the olive groves stretch across the hillsides as they have for generations, their ancient roots drawing sustenance from the same earth that nourished them in his grandfather's time, and will nourish them in seasons he will never see. The work connects him to this continuity, each careful pressing adding another small measure to the estate's abundance, each day's labor fitting seamlessly into patterns that extend far beyond his individual life. Constantine's work-stained hands rest briefly on the smooth surface of the press beam, feeling the wood's familiar grain beneath his palms. The scent of olive oil fills the air around him, mingling with autumn sunshine and the distant sound of voices from the groves. Everything holds its proper place, the tools arranged just so, the vessels waiting to receive their contents, the pressing room standing ready to transform another day's harvest into liquid sustenance. The deep contentment that forms his emotional center settles over him completely. This work, this place, these patient rhythms, they have been enough and they remain enough. The simplicity of it brings him peace. Outside, the world continues its vast and complex unfolding. But here, in this moment, there is only the quiet satisfaction of work well done and the gentle promise of work still to come.